And so my father's argument was that we needed a domestic Marshall Plan, which meant that we needed to look at acts of slavery. We needed to look at the impact of taking the land and the culture of indigenous people. We needed to look at our history of immigration and supporting refugees within this country as well, and offset the harms that have been done to certain populations.
My guest today is Lauren Casteel, President and CEO of the Women's Foundation of Colorado. Lauren's powerful voice and leadership in the areas of gender, race, and economic equity have helped thousands of individuals throughout her career. Lauren has won many awards and accolades for her dedicated work for equal rights and social justice and philanthropy. She is a Colorado Women's Hall of Fame inductee, has been recognized for her many contributions to the Anti-Defamation League, the League of Women Voters, Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce, the Girl Scouts, the Denver Mayor, the Rocky Mountain Region Black Economic Summit. You get the idea. So many more. You can see photos on our website of Lauren sharing a stage with luminaries such as Michelle Obama, Hillary Rodham Clinton, and Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. And yet, despite all these awards and the illustrious people she sometimes keeps company with, Lauren speaks and works from a humanist, grounded place of love and respect for all people, especially those struggling to make it in a system that's been stacked against them from birth. A mother and a grandmother herself, Lauren gives honor and credit to her own success to her remarkable parents, who are both professors as well as civil rights and community leaders. If you would please take a moment now to subscribe to this podcast wherever you watch or listen. And if you enjoy this episode, please share it with your own community. And now enjoy my conversation with the remarkable Lauren Casteel. Hello, Lauren Casteel. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Deborah. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you. It's great to meet you, and thank you so much for being on the program. It's you have a voice that's very important, so I'm excited to share it with people.
Well, it's certainly just one voice among many, and I'm thrilled to have this opportunity and to see where the conversation goes.
Me too. This is a new topic for me. You're more of an expert than I am on it. It's kind of been your life's work, so I might have you take the heavy lifting here a little bit. But let's just start by saying that you are the president and CEO of the Colorado Women's Foundation. I guess it's written Women's Foundation of Colorado. Yeah, to be right. And this is the third foundation. This is a record in Colorado. Third foundation that you have directed after Denver Foundation and Buell Foundation, and now the Women's Foundation. So that's a record, and congratulations.
One clarification: the first foundation I led was the Private Family Foundation of Ambassador Swanee Hunt and her sister Helen, the Hunt Alternatives Fund. When they were jointly together, I was the staff person, and then they broke up into the Sister Fund and Hunt Alternatives Fund. Then the Buell, and then I was a VP at the Denver Foundation.
Okay. Well, you've won so many awards. I won't go into them all, but I will put them in the show notes for people to read, because you've had really quite a stellar. Well, you've had a stellar career, and you should own that, because you really have, and you're a great role model for women in Colorado in particular, but in general. But you have, and you were inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame, and so that I will mention, because that's quite an honor just in itself. But so why don't we just start first with finding out a little bit about what the foundation, the Women's Foundation of Colorado, how you support racial and gender and economic equity, and that's specifically for women in Colorado, correct?
Yes, that's correct. There are a number of ways. First, I should say that we are a community foundation, which means that we are a foundation focused on community impact, supported by community, and we are, in that regard, a community investment institution. So,
as opposed to what? Like just for
a
people
private foundation, for
got
example.
it.
So we have thousands of individuals and businesses and other foundations who support us. We have to meet what's called a public support test for the IRS. And so as a place that is gathering resources from the entire community to support our vision, which is actually pretty simple, that women and certainly girls as they grow will have the opportunity to achieve prosperity regardless of their background or identity. So all women in Colorado would have access to the opportunity for prosperity. And we do that through our mission, which is to catalyze our community, to advance and accelerate economic opportunities for Colorado, all Colorado women and their families. And so when it relates to racial and economic and gender, those intersections of who we are as people, and that would include abilities, it would include countries of origin, language, there one's gender identity or expression. There are many intersections within our lives. So in that regard, we use a number of tools to advance economic equity and economic opportunity. And they include, of course, building resources that we apply to our grant making. Over the course of the past couple of years, we've given more than $2 million in grants to nonprofit partners. And we also have donor advised fund participants, donor advised fund holders who contribute as well and who give grants to nonprofit organizations. Similarly, our public policy, and this certainly relates, our topic today relates to that. Our public policy work helps us to move beyond those critical individual needs and support systems holistically that a woman and her family members, her children may need. And we are proud to provide, I wish more, and we'll hope to find ways to do even more to support women throughout the state in that regard. But our public policy, using the example of equal pay for equal work, we just passed the Black Women's Equal Pay Day, and Black women, for example.
Meaning we just hit that milestone for the year, right? The day at which
it's a little over.
It sounds like we passed a law or something, but yeah, you mean, yeah.
Exactly. But the law that our team led does help to close that gap. So there had been a law in 2019 that the governor signed in our office to recognize the work that we and 9 to 5 and Colorado Women's Bar Association had contributed to that law. And then that law was improved in the last session of the legislature here in 2023. So now transparency is required. People can't ask about your past salary. I don't know about you, but folks always used to ask me what my previous salary had been, which perpetuated if you were being
interesting.
It just goes on and on and on in a systemic way and carrying along those histories of inequity.
Right.
Now, if there is an opportunity for a woman to work with the State Department of Labor and Employment to be able to go back 6 years, still having a statute of limitation of 2 years, but going back to have that rectified relative to a 6-year period. So that
rectified,
is
meaning
significant.
What do you mean by rectified? Who does the rectifying?
You can be paid for the full 6 years.
So you could
have that
sue.
difference.
would that be a suit that you would bring if if you
Well,
found out that
we
you
hope
would?
to, we don't want to flood the courts. So by
Yeah,
using the state, then they will review these cases
that's amazing.
and make determinations.
Oh,
So
I have not heard that.
yeah,
That's quite amazing. So you
it
work
is quite
and
amazing.
do you introduce new legislation? And this is at the state level, correct?
Yes, the state
Yeah.
level.
Okay.
We have not written legislation in and of itself, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly around this law, we have, in fact, worked very hard with members of the legislature, with the governor's office, the
Mm-hmm.
business community, communities writ
Yeah.
large, to ensure that
Wow.
the law had within it the kinds of guidelines and actions that are necessary to really move us toward equal pay for equal work.
Wow.
So, from an affirmative action perspective, that
Mm-hmm.
is an affirmative action in and of itself, certainly
Very
from
much so.
a gender perspective. And when one thinks about
Mm-hmm.
women of color, whether they be Black, Indigenous, Native American, and Latina, certainly as well, then that's meaningful. But that's different than the affirmative action decision that was recently made regarding higher education.
Right.
So that's public
All right.
policy,
Well,
our grant making, and impact investing as well. We support social enterprises and other entities, that small businesses, to help
did not
them
know
through
that.
a women's impact investing giving circle. So there are only about
I
5.
saw
If
the
your
giving
listeners,
circles.
yeah,
Okay.
and so we
Yeah.
do hold donor advised funds and giving circles as
Mm-hmm.
well, and are now in the process of building resources to support some affordable housing. And then lastly,
Hmm.
something we're very proud of is that our
Yeah.
portfolio of investments are 100% invested from a gender lens perspective. So what that means is that our investment advisors and managers are looking at women in leadership, looking at shareholder advocacy, looking at environmental, social, and governance policies and practices, family-friendly
My
policies
goodness.
and practices as well. So currently, also because we've had an aspiration to provide more opportunities for diverse managers, including
Mm-hmm.
women and people of color, about 50% of our managers fall into those categories, 20 also being people of color among that group.
So let's see. When you on these giving
That was
circles,
a
you
lot.
started to say
I know that
it
was
was a
a
lot. It's a lot, but
lot.
that tells you how much you're I mean, you do so much more because honestly, in the past, I've had some sort of trouble fully understanding what Women's Foundation did specifically. And I've seen circles, and I've seen, I think you give scholarships. I don't know if you mentioned
No, we don't
specifically
do
scholarship. You
scholarships.
don't
That's
give
correct.
scholarships. Okay.
No, we do not.
All right. So I had a very vague idea. Even after reading things, I've had a bigger, still somewhat vague idea. So that helps a lot. And I am actually so impressed because I had no idea the power and the granularity with which you go into each area of life. So you're really supporting women at every single level and from every single background. It sounds like
Exactly.
economically,
And
racially, ethnically,
right. And I think
even internationally.
yes, we do have a giving
I
circle
mean,
that
if they're
does
in
some.
Colorado, yeah,
Right. Well, if they're an
yeah,
IRS 501c3, but maybe
yeah,
doing international work, we have a
right.
giving circle that has a particular focus on that called Beyond Our
Very interesting.
Borders. But our general work is focused very much on the state of Colorado, and public
Okay.
policy affects every woman in the
Yes.
state of Colorado. Paid family medical leave was another one of our top legislative priorities, just as Don't Tax Dignity bill, when basically what that means is that now things such as tampons, menstrual period related products, incontinence products, diapers will no longer be taxed. So
Well, this is a
those are some
very
of.
impactful organization. It's really, really exciting, honestly, to hear about that. All of it.
Well, thank you. I
I'm
have an
surprised by the
incredible team.
breadth of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I
have
can
an
also
incredible
see.
team.
I'm sure you'd have to have an incredible team to accomplish all of that, but also you need leadership. Um, I think there's been a huge I don't want to say explosion, but a burst of new energy coming since you've been there in 2015. Because I think many of these programs are new. I was somewhat familiar with it before, and I'm just seeing a lot more now. So your leadership has made a huge difference. And obviously, you're very passionate. You can tell as you speak about it of how important this all is to women in Colorado. It's clearly you're aligned with your mission there. So, which is why when you wrote that letter that we'll get to next, it really struck me so viscerally because I could feel your emotion in it. And what we're speaking about, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a very significant ruling. Students for fair admissions versus Harvard and students for fair admissions versus UNC, University of North Carolina. And the court found that Harvard and UNC, their affirmative action programs violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, setting this huge ripple effect through the country of so many areas, and diversity and equity and inclusion, all the things that everyone has been fighting for decades and decades and decades. I don't think it can be overstated the impact that these two decisions are going to have, though some people will understate it. So I guess my first question is, can you share your interpretation of that ruling and what you think it's going to mean in a very pragmatic and practical sense, first of all?
Right. And we also need to mention that, within a day or two of the affirmative action, the erosion, the death of, the end of, whatever word one chooses to use of affirmative
Yes.
action, that debt forgiveness also went down. And so those two things together related to higher education are significant. I think that what really struck me and the emotion that I felt, and certainly I am a Black woman who benefited from affirmative action when, although the 1977 ruling hadn't occurred, but consciousness, when I started college in 1971. And there were only 50 Black students on the Swarthmore campus where I attended. And providing those kinds of opportunities, as my father, who was executive director of the National Urban League, had advocated for and became a part of the Johnson administration's war on poverty, was a concept of the Marshall Plan. This country has a history when there has been disaster or war or some decimating event or series of events to help rebuild. And so my father's argument was that we needed a domestic Marshall Plan, which meant that we needed to look at acts of slavery. We needed to look at the impact of taking the land and the culture of indigenous people. We needed to look at our history of immigration and supporting refugees within this country as well, and offset the harms that have been done to certain populations. So certainly our system of slavery and the racial implications that carry on to this very day. We talked about the reckoning around race when George Floyd was murdered. I don't know that we have reckoned with it. That seems to imply that we have come to some clear understanding and movement forward to move past it. This decision, the affirmative action decision, in my mind, reaffirmed the fact that we have not reckoned with
Mm-hmm.
the harm that has been caused by racist, misogynistic, uh, also indigenous canceling and harm of cultures. New studies coming about Indian schools every day and the harm that was done to those
Yes.
children. So
Yes.
I think it is, in terms of this particular thing, what I said in the letter that I wrote was that I am bereft and outraged. I do
Yeah.
believe that if we have the ability to look at socioeconomic factors or military background or
Mm.
extracurricular activities, right? They matter. Kids will do all kinds of things
Oh,
as
yes.
they're applying for school to, reinforce their resumes so that they have
They will.
extracurricular activities. Why should the historic um, roles that have been played in the lives of entire communities not also be considered? It bothers me. I come from a family of privilege. That doesn't bother me. But I recognize that I come from a family of privilege. And there are many systems today that are, in fact, affirmative action for people of wealth. When we think about legacy students who are getting into college, and that conversation similarly is going on today.
Definitely, that is being addressed. At least it's come up, and this may have brought
Mm-hmm.
that up and strengthened the focus on that a little bit more. And just for
Right.
people who may not know, if they don't know about the legacy system, it's just that
Mm-hmm.
if your father went to Harvard, your mother went to Harvard, or any number of higher
Mm-hmm.
profile schools, then you have an automatic, I don't know if it's an automatic in, but you certainly have a leg up on the
Priority.
system in
Yeah.
terms of getting in. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
which
So,
obviously keeps the privilege going through generation after generation. So, and that
absolutely.
is still in place. That has never been knocked down by a Supreme Court. And I don't know if it's been challenged in the Supreme Court, the
I
legacy
don't,
system.
not in the Supreme Court, but the conversation is certainly
Yeah.
occurring. And a lot of people don't realize, again, going back to systems, that
Mm-hmm.
the GI Bill provided profound opportunity for a generation, right? Our parents, I'm assuming, I think we're both boomers.
Yeah.
And so, but my family probably, if you had military in your family, my father served in the all black troops during World War
Mm.
II. But most of those soldiers who came back to the United States, especially in the Jim Crow South, did not have access to higher education. They weren't allowed
Right.
into those schools at that time in the late 40s. And similarly, were not allowed to buy the tract homes that began to build the multi
Mm.
generational wealth and assets. We all know the role that home ownership plays. My parents were fortunate, but they made a sacrifice. They traveled from the South to Minnesota and were
Mm.
able to use the GI Bill at the University of
Really?
Minnesota. There
Wow.
were a number of former Black soldiers who did that, but far less opportunities existing. And so the wealth gap today, in particular, between Black families and white families, can be tied very directly to that historic discrimination of Jim Crow and the
Mm-hmm.
usage or lack of ability to use uh, the GI Bill.
So, what do you think is going to happen at this point in terms of other universities? Is your understanding that it's a Supreme Court law, but does that prevent, say, the University of Denver, where you're located, from using affirmative action?
Well,
Is
I'm
that how
not an
you understand
attorney,
it?
so I have to give
Yeah.
the great big caveat. And
Yeah.
our offices are certainly located at the University of Denver. I can't speak to their practices. Every one of us who cares deeply about racial equity, and this is about this affirmative action case, is about race very explicitly. I believe absolutely will continue to adhere to the letter of the law. What I have read, though, is that there are a number of strategies, for example, of how one recruits from high schools for these schools, how one uses the demographics of the geography of the communities surrounding a particular university. So I think that there are ways that people can stay within the context of the law, but by the same token, not step away from their core values and the belief that more diverse student bodies, right, in fact, enhance the education for everyone. The more we are exposed to a wider range of backgrounds, identities, lived experiences, cultures, then the better our society is. And that at one time, when we think about those who escaped Europe and came to the United States, at one time we celebrated that diversity of people who came to this country and helped to build that country. Sadly,
we
though,
did and we didn't. I mean,
we did and we didn't.
we've always,
Sadly,
yeah.
Their othering occurs in many, many different ways, based on language, based on culture, right. Names that were changed. And again, if I go back to our indigenous communities in the United States, it is interesting how color in and of itself remains a barrier within this country. That in and of itself is sometimes, oftentimes, or all the time, can be a deterrent. When we think about the role of police within our society, and I believe in our having a system that involves justice, that involves ensuring our safety and protection, but the biases that exist, simply if one happens to be, driving while black, if you're a young man in particular, if there are minor infractions that occur, on the street or in a traffic situation, then race is undeniably a factor.
Oh, yeah. And I think we've all become more aware of that in the last couple of years, with so many shootings, so many high profile shootings of Black men in particular, Black women as well. But I think it has brought the conversation, undoubtedly it's brought the conversation back. But still, as you were talking, it's just in the slightest measure, it seems to me. It went on, there was conversation, it was very robust. My niece is Black, and I had never heard in all the years that I've known her until I saw her write an op-ed. I get teary every time I talk about it, because I'm like, how have I not known these experiences that you've had? There's been a lot of suppressed conversation, and that brought it up for a while. I was a diversity trainer for 10 years. I knew nothing. I can see that now. I was like that. I was flying blind. We only know. I think that the more privilege in the white population of this country has been very blinded. And what's so concerning to me about this case is that we were just starting to get to a point where people were talking about it, although it kind of went up and went back down. It hasn't been a steady conversation. But to have a Supreme Court decision like this, I'm just wondering, to me, and I'll just refer back to one of your other points about you saying the wealth has, there's these systemic situations and guidelines in and interpretations of the law that have kept particularly people of color from attaining wealth. One of those is buying homes and inability to buy homes. And I just read something, I think in the last week or so, about a Black couple who couldn't get the loan that they wanted or couldn't get the house they wanted. These things are, and a white couple went in and did the same thing and got it. So, we're a little bit more aware, but we're just a little bit more aware. And the belief of these systemic systems, that to understand the power of them, still feels like white America is not getting it. So when I see something like the Supreme Court decision that's going to further nullify that progress, I'm wondering what if you believe that decision is really going to turn things back. Your father,
studies have shown that in states, and again, I'm not a researcher or a data person, so I'm going to paraphrase, but studies have certainly shown that erosion. So a comprehensive study in states of medical school, I think it was, in states that banned affirmative action, that there had been a devastating impact with enrollment by students of underrepresented groups. So if one declining by a third, I think it was. So if one also thinks about the conversation now about Black maternal health that is based on outcomes are based solely on race, right? So Serena Williams, Allison Felix, these, icons, for example, in sports who have all kinds of privilege, found themselves not being believed in the medical system, and facing potential life or death situations during their pregnancies or at the time of birth. And so if we don't have doctors who also are in the pipeline, who are representative of the full diversity of our country, then in fact, those outcomes can be affected. We also know when there is diversity of teachers, right? So higher education, teaching degrees helps to enhance the achievement of all students. So yes, I am afraid of the chilling effect that many of these entities will have throughout our society. Similarly, I think it was 11 attorney generals wrote a joint letter, saying that DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that are often a part of and increasingly become a part of businesses and business practices, that those where there would be any federal monies, but that those kinds of things are also being shut down. And so I guess the part
was that prior to the decision they were being shut down?
That was after.
Oh, really? Yeah. So there was an immediate response.
Immediate. Suits against funds, investment funds that were supporting explicitly Black, venture capital things. So those kinds of things are happening. But what it is it's dehumanizing. Okay? But what it is saying
Explain
is that
there
are groups of people who have historically been kept down, right? Who have historically had opportunities ripped from them, that now that is literally allowable. Even they say it could roll down, and I don't know if this is true, but into high schools could be affected. Private high schools could also be, or magnet schools, wherever there's a selection, some sort of a selective process for students in education.
Wow.
So we don't know yet.
Right, but it's not looking promising. I'm actually quite shocked to hear that the diversity, inclusion, equity programs have been already looked at as is it funding for them, or are you saying that businesses themselves are just choosing to suddenly?
No, the letters, and I should have pulled it up for you. The letter from,
that's all right.
from these attorney generals.
I will find it.
But there could be funding for DEI, for groups that have DEI programs, is my understanding. So I urge your audience to look into that separately.
Yeah, and I'm going to find that and put that.
Yeah, private corporations can still do what they want, but you were saying something earlier about, the fact that these conversations were elevated at the time of the murder of George Floyd, at the time in the pandemic when the veil was ripped off about the role that people of color play on the front lines of our medical system as nurses, when we think about our childcare systems and women, again, in each of those entities, being on the front lines and trying to support making work, trying to support better healthcare. But sadly, our interest wanes and self-interest begins to become more dominant.
But what is the self-interest? How is that? I mean, there have been a number of corporations who have flourished with a greater amount. I mean, they see the different viewpoints coming, how much that helps build a better product. How is that helping these companies or anyone to not have those?
Those companies will, in fact, maintain their values. I think those who made and commitments. I really like to believe that when I think about, entities. We have our luncheon coming up in September, which is the largest fundraiser in the state for Colorado women. And the amount of support that we receive and sponsorships from, large corporations, whether here in Colorado, it's First Bank or Excel or IMA. I mean, there are a number. There's a group in Colorado, Colorado's Inclusive Economy, that is made up of businesses that recognize what you just said, that we're better for it. Businesses are more profitable when they have.
It's a very tangible improvement.
Yes, there's tangible evidence of that.
Yes.
When opportunity is in fact given, and when there are teams that become, as a result, more creative and more dynamic in moving whatever the business interest may be and supporting its constituents or its clients or consumers.
Yeah. I'm wondering what you think about the reasoning behind this decision. I don't know if you've read all the arguments pro and con. I know that Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's the first Black female justice on the Supreme Court, she said, deeming race irrelevant in life does not make it so, deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. And I'm wondering, is that what the thinking was, that they thought it was irrelevant, that race is no longer irrelevant, or is there something more sinister going on here?
It's hard for me to say. Is this something about?
I know you can't put yourself in their heads.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say.
I wouldn't ask you to.
But one has to ask oneself, questions about, as our global demographics shift. The global majority is, in fact, people of color. If there's some sort of threat to the infrastructure and the historic infrastructure of our system that has favored, for example, white men systemically. And I need to also be clear, there are many white men who are allies and who demonstrate allyship.
Of course,
for women,
right.
and for, those different abilities, who see people as people. But for us to be so naive as to believe in colorblindness is a terrible mistake. That means you're not seeing me at all. So when I think about it, is not so in life. When I and members of my family, I have two grandsons who are Black and Navajo. When they move through the world, you cannot tell me that they are not seen in that context by the world, and that judgments about who they are or what their abilities might be are not made at some biased, deeply biased level by some people. I think we also have to be careful about exceptionalism, right? Where we lift up, individuals as well. They did that and they did that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. We had a Black president. Everything's fixed, right?
Yes. And it has been interesting since that presidency, the movement of erosion of voting rights. We have to be aware of all of the rights that are being eroded at this time, including, we didn't talk about the Dobbs decision. I read a headline the other day and it was so sickened that I could not read the full story. So I can't tell you where this was. But the headline said she was not allowed to have an abortion. She is now a mother and she starts 7th grade tomorrow. Now, and there again are clear studies around access to the full range. I know. I mean,
you can't even. I see why you couldn't. I can't even keep hearing you. I almost feel like I fainted when you said that. Yeah.
It makes you ill. Yeah. It absolutely makes you ill.
It really does.
And so all of the rights that are being eroded for us to have bodily autonomy, again, I've mentioned voting, the affirmative action decision, are having profound effects. And we also know that there is a clear linkage to having access to abortion that also ties to economic security as well. Mm-hmm. But when I think of the programs that we fund and support, that support, individual women and families and community through our grant making, our key principles involve access to education and training, whatever that training may be. Right. Today, if someone can have specialized training in artificial intelligence, good on them, right? That is going to be a role for the future, or other technical kinds of training. As there are many options beyond
supposed to, of course, beyond college, traditional
four-year college, in addition to four-year college, jobs with pay and benefits, capital for women entrepreneurs, childcare and caregiver support. So if in fact, people can't get jobs with good pay and with benefits because of lack of access to education and training, we have a ripple effect. Mm-hmm. Given the cost of housing, certainly in Colorado, I've been traveling the state over the course of the past month, and there are issues that come up over and over again in both our urban and rural communities. Housing and affordable housing certainly being one. The other one is healthy food, access to food. Childcare is another one. Women in particular who are sandwiched between aging parents and younger children, and having caregivers available for those aging parents. I believe we should have 24-hour childcare as well. We know what happened to childcare during the pandemic and the ability of people to work. We also
and the ripple effects still going on from that.
It's still going on.
All these things have major implications for the following decades.
Yes,
yeah,
major.
Even the Supreme Court decision, if they reversed it in 2 years, it would already take, I bet, a decade to these things.
A pipeline of excellence, and I don't want young people to lose a sense of hope that shows up in not voting, for example, not considering future options because they assume that opportunity doesn't exist. When communities lose what feels like a sense of agency and and a
Hope is
plan
everything.
of opportunity, then they lose hope. The other thing that we do through our grant making is we give our nonprofit grantee partners who are doing incredible work on the ground. I have to tell you, I struggle between being both, when I travel, inspired and also feeling dismay because of the sacrifices that I see individuals making on behalf of their communities. We have to figure out there is wealth in this community, there is abundance, how we can give more. But one of the things that we need to do, as well as to recognize that women's having extra cash in their pockets is not a bad thing. The stereotype of the welfare queen still haunts us. It's a despicable stereotype that exists out there. What we know from our programs through what we call WINCOME, Women with Income, and also as a part of our funding for Women and Girls of Color Fund, is that there are a number of things that need to be done. One is to support leaders, community leaders, oftentimes leaders of color who know their communities, women of color in particular who know their communities and who are working on the ground, and we need to do it fully and strongly. The other thing is that if we give a little extra cash goes into a woman's pocket, that car she hasn't been able to get new tires for, she can get new tires. She can pay a medical copay for much needed medication. She can get, because this is an example I use a lot, but folks don't realize that supplemental government programs don't pay for a rotisserie chicken or diapers. So during the pandemic, everybody's like, use hand sanitizer. It doesn't pay for that. You can't get cooked food with what many people would think of as being
people sitting in judgment somewhere.
It's about deservedness.
But diapers? I mean, how does one argue diapers? I could see they make an argument for cooked versus non-cooked food, crazily, but
when someone's working 3 jobs, I know when my kid's coming home and having to start with a raw chicken that you've got to prepare as opposed to a rotisserie chicken,
and the prices might not. Yes, and their children getting nutrition and them getting nutrition. Yeah,
absolutely. So, folks, I think back to your saying that people don't seem to know or understand or even want to listen. So I hope the Women's Foundation of Colorado remains a place where, yes, we have core values. We have a core focus around gender, racial, and economic equity, but we're also a place of dialogue and, a place where women, however they may define themselves from the perspective of one's gender identity or gender expression, are all welcomed within our community. And next, on the 21st, for our annual luncheon, I'm thrilled that we will have Sally Krawcheck, who is a titan of Wall Street, who will be in conversation with one of our trustees, who's also the founder of the New Community Transformation Fund, talking about not only the economy, but what can be done to close the wealth gap. More importantly, whether it's through our time, our talent, our treasure, our testimonial, for us, whether it's through our grant making on the ground, whether it's through our portfolio, but how can we invest in women? It doesn't make sense that 50% of the population should not have equal and equitable opportunities. It is not logical that just as we had the, Marshall Plan to rebuild communities after World War II, that we would not rebuild communities here within our own country who have suffered for generations.
Is your luncheon open to the public, or do you have to be
It
a
is.
member?
You
Or
can get tickets at
yeah.
on our homepage of our website which is wfco.org, Women's Foundation Colorado.org. You will see a picture of Sally Krawcheck and the announcement for the luncheon. Tickets begin at $75. Of course, sponsorships go up much higher. There are also individual tables. So go to our website.
Yeah.
Having support, those resources are the resources that help us.
That move on.
To really do our philanthropic work. And we're a philanthropic institution. We are community investment.
You're making. I would love to encourage people to attend that, and I will put the website on there and the link to specifically to where tickets, because this is one way. Because one of my questions for you is, what is one way? I mean, there's a number of ways that we can sort of combat this overarching decision that we can't reverse. But first, one way would be to support organizations like yours, and this is a great way to do it, and also learn something and be a part of community building as well. I think it would be to attend that luncheon. So I don't know how many seats you have, but hopefully hopefully you have a lot of tickets left.
We do have tickets left, and we are the history of our luncheon. We have certainly had a lot of star power in the past, celebrities, whether Octavia Spencer or Misty Copeland, Billie Jean King, America Ferrera, one time Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama joined us, just us at the Pepsi Center in 2017, her first public event before she even did her book tour.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Really?
This luncheon
Good for you.
is unique because I think at this time, when we talk about gender, racial, and economic equity together, to really talk about what it means to invest in women at all levels of investment, there is nothing more timely. And we will have powerful videos of some of our grantees that are doing the work.
That'd be great. I'd love to see that
as well. So it's always heartfelt and energetic and informative, and we would love to have your listeners join us. I hope to see you.
Actually, I know. I've already decided I'm definitely going to be there. So that's a for sure. And I do feel like, I think I'd mentioned to earlier what CNN commentator Van Jones was talking about, this ruling and the other ruling, LGBTQ ruling that came right after that.
Our LGBTQIA plus community. Yes.
It's but like, as he's saying, he said this ruling is a tragedy resulting from a deliberate strategy by conservatives to influence the court. We don't have to get overly political, but there is a strategy. It's pretty obvious at this point.
Yeah, there has been, just like the Dobbs decision, a march toward a particular outcome that has been well funded and well supported for an extended period of time, which goes back to my concern that I hope that people don't fall back into a place of fear, who share values of what gender, racial, and economic equity means. And I am including, intersections, LGBTQIA plus community. I'm talking about our disabled community. I'm talking about transgender women. I'm talking about Black, Latina, Asian. Think about the Asian violence that went on within this country. If we don't really reckon in our hearts and in our actions as individuals and in a society, the erosion that I feel can be terrifying, but it cannot be immobilizing. And
No,
so,
and we need to find those ways to take action. You just
yes,
mentioned all the groups that you mentioned. We're talking about a plurality. There's a
a
lot of
plurality.
power in that, and those all of us together can totally make a difference. We just have to believe that we can. You do have to hold on to hope. I think supporting organizations like yours is critical to that. I think running for office is critical for that.
Yes.
Run for Something is a great organization supporting women and women of color in running for office. I really encourage people to check out runforsomething.org, I believe it is, but the organization is called Run for Something. But whether we're running for something, whether we're voting for something, I hear the people using the word citizen as a verb, and I think that's what we need to start doing. Is we need to start citizening. We need to start taking action as citizens and taking it back, because when you don't completely, it's like democracy. If we can keep it, and this is sort of the same thing, can we keep our power? Can we keep what has been coming? And certainly for people of color, this is a strike, and a strike against women and strike against people of
It
color.
is a
So
strike, and we can't give away that power, so we have to be motivated. We have to see the conditions. As I traveled around the state, I know stories of people living in fear because of documentation status.
Yes.
And oftentimes providing the backbone of our agricultural systems, truth be told. And so
for many decades, that's been
for generations. Generations. So it is, if in fact that plurality, if we can awaken that sleeping giant of believing that we are all better together, right? Those are the tenets that we were told hold our country together. And what we're seeing is that our country is in fact experiencing a ripping at the seams in many ways. So it is critical that plurality, I'm going to keep saying that word, that
it's powerful.
We, the people, come together for the benefit, and I would say at the Women's Foundation, of all women. Our goal is to build a state that is in fact a place where all women rise and all women thrive. That is who we are. That is our community investment. But we also recognize that there are people who have been left behind, and we need to redistribute resources to those folks to ensure that, in fact, opportunity doors open to them. So
I love everything that you just said, and it was very powerful. So I didn't want to interrupt a single word, because I feel the power of that, and I feel the promise of that, and I feel the importance of that. I would add that one thing that I think has sort of gotten us in this position that we're in, where things are eroding, has to do with the division between, the red and the blue, and all this in our country. And there are a lot of white men who have never seen the promise of what more privileged white men have had. And I think a lot of that has driven some of this anger forward, feeling that they were left out as well. So I guess just to say, to stand up for oneself, to stand up for one's rights and one's group's right, your nationality, your ethnicity, your gender, whatever the case may be, is not to say that other people don't deserve it. And sometimes that's how these types of movements get
right. I have
negated and talked down. Yeah.
I have a friend who is a transgender white man. The gender assigned to him at birth, his sex was as a female. And as soon as he fully transitioned, he said immediately the world treated him differently. He has a beard.
My goodness.
Immediately,
really?
As a white man, the world treated him differently. The way they shared space with him, the way they listened to him in meetings,
Wow.
All of those kinds of things that without knowing anything about him, the fact that he was a white male gave him instantaneous privileges. He said it was one of the most startling experiences that he'd had because it was so fast.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've not heard a story like that. That's really interesting.
So, absolutely. Are there, if we think, are there people of all backgrounds and identities living in poverty? There's no question. Are there
Yes.
people of all background and identities who, because of some circumstance, may not have had opportunity? There is no question about that. The difference is that society was not established to prevent them from opportunity. And for many within this country, there have been clear efforts to prevent them from going to the same school. So if we go back to 1953 and the separate is not equal, Brown versus the Board of Education law, it's very clear. And I happen to have attended segregated schools in Atlanta.
Did you really?
Yeah, I am old enough to go back to Jim Crow. And people are surprised by that when I say that is my lifetime. That is my lifetime.
That was your experience. It even surprises me.
Lived in a segregated neighborhood, attended segregated schools, and access to the best textbooks were different. And so where my privilege came in, because my parents were able to go to the University of Minnesota and get their masters. They had both gone and met at Kentucky State, which is a historical Black college. But after the war, they went way north, like way north.
Yeah, they did.
They did.
Yeah.
And but they both taught at HBCUs in Atlanta. My mother at Spelman, my father at Atlanta University. And so even with their education, though, the textbooks that were available to me in elementary school were not of the same caliber. And I then had an opportunity. My reading was a little bit delayed, much to my mother's dismay. And it wasn't that my parents didn't read to me or things of that sort. When I walked to school, because my mother was teaching, Mrs. Barrett, on her way to catch the bus to go clean houses, would walk me to the school, a couple of blocks up the street, because she was a domestic worker in white homes. So I also grew up in a neighborhood, a Black neighborhood, where I saw philanthropy of caring and support, and whether it was providing food or rent parties or childcare or anything of that nature would occur. Before my father moved to become the executive director of the National Urban League, where he was one of the big six of the civil rights movement, I saw him all over the place as we celebrated the 60th anniversary of the March of Washington. Oh, yeah.
Right. And he gave a speech and was involved in the March of Washington, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was one of the, many of the meetings were held in his office, and was one of the absolute leaders of that. But before he got that position, philanthropy, a Rockefeller grant, allowed him to go to Harvard for a year. And I ended up going from Oglethorpe Elementary School in Atlanta, Georgia, segregated South, to Buckingham School for Girls. There happened to be one Black teacher in the school who was the second grade teacher. Betty Rollins was her name. And I can't tell you what a difference it made to me to have this teacher believe in my capacity to spur my curiosity, to help me to overcome my reading and other detriments, in my educational background that I had experienced. It made a difference. If I were going to say, other than
That's
my
amazing.
parents or my family, that I am where I am today, it would be because Betty Rollins was given the opportunity to get her teaching degree, and that she was also welcomed at Buckingham School for Girls, and that all of the other students, as a result, got to meet someone who I believe she changed their lives as well as mine. So to not have those doors of opportunity.
You just gave the entire reasoning why this ruling is so harmful and why the idea for equal access to education is so critical. I mean, you're such a role model, and this is a second grade teacher. Yeah, we're
Betty
not talking
Rollins.
about a PhD. Yeah.
I went second to grade. See her later on in life. I traveled from Colorado to the Boston area and found her and spent some time at her home, and just so
that's beautiful.
I could thank her because she was pivotal. But what if she had not been able to get that teaching degree?
Everything and I know changes. One person. Yeah.
She was a phenomenal.
That's a beautiful story.
Teacher, a phenomenal teacher. So
that's almost a mic drop moment, because you just explained it all with that story, and it makes me very emotional hearing about it, because people often think they're grade school teachers, but the idea of seeing someone who looks like you, people don't get the importance of it. You hear people say it a lot. There's no one that looked like me. And then there was that one person who did, and it changed everything, because it just says, I belong, you belong. You know, you don't think you belong until you see that. So thank you so much for sharing that story. And really, thank you so much for.
I was the only African American child in the school.
Yeah, all the way.
She happened to be the second grade teacher.
She was the only teacher. Yeah. Very powerful argument. I wish you had been able to speak to the Supreme Court I don't know if it would matter, but
I don't know.
It's a beautiful story, and your whole life is a testament to it. So, I appreciate you sharing so much of your history and your family history and your work that you're doing at the Women's Foundation. I strongly encourage people to check out your website. As I said, I'll have it on there, and encourage them to attend the luncheon if possible, or just support you or any of the giving circles that you have through the foundation, because that gives people a chance. Maybe a lot of people aren't familiar with the giving circles, but I would encourage them to check that out. I know we can't go too much past our time here, but
we have many giving vehicles, many ways to participate. So they will learn all about that at the luncheon. And before we close, I also want to give a testimony to my mom, who I said taught college, right? Taught higher education at Spelman. My father was the dean of the School of Social Work. And later on, after my father passed when I was 17, and she didn't have anything in her name, not surprising, right?
Oh, you were only 17 when he passed?
Yeah, I was only 17. But and she, like so many women, had nothing in her name or whatever, right? Think about that in those times.
Oh, yeah.
But she went on to be on the board of what was then Philip Morris, New York Life, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Dance Theater of Harlem, and Lincoln Center. And there is no question in my mind that her education, right, also allowed her and her exposure to sit in those rooms as the first Black woman in that capacity with confidence, and to create change as well. So, her education, her exposure, my parents, who were born in the 1920s, were extraordinarily privileges for them and are girders for my own success.
Well, they
and my
must have
team.
they must have supported you and your team. Well, but just growing up though, they always made you know that you were meant to be in the places that you wanted to be, that you belonged there as well. Like your teacher did, but by demonstrating their success, they really gave you an incredible lesson as well.
Yeah. But I also have to
And
be honest.
confidence.
I had my failures, and we don't talk about that. I actually didn't graduate from Swarthmore, and that raises, other issues as a result of a series of traumas, of which one was my father's death as I was starting college, and a series of other deaths and a violent assault that I also experienced. But, ultimately, yes, I did know in my mind. I mean, I went back to school. I graduated from the University of Colorado at Denver, and the award of which I am most proud is, in fact, an honorary doctorate in humane letters that I received from them. But we don't talk enough. I didn't have the word trauma in my vocabulary. I didn't have the word depression. I didn't know how to ask. I felt embarrassed. That's why I ended up leaving school, was because I just sort of shut down. I didn't know how to have help. And I think it's really important in these times as well that we're talking about those kinds of issues as well, in particular for women, that we can normalize, whether it's a chronic issue or whether it's circumstantial, but that we're open to those. And I think it's also important for leaders to say, yeah, Sally Krawcheck, I think I'll talk about that as well, to say, some things didn't go so great. Not everything.
Thank you so much for sharing that. No, because you're right. It looks very glossy from the outside. Oh, my father's civil rights leader and the dean, and your mother, Professor Spellman, and look at you now and all that. But yes, of course, no life. I don't care who you are.
No life. So if we think about it,
really escape it, but
housing, if someone doesn't have childcare, if someone is, living paycheck to paycheck, if they don't have savings, if they don't have health care, if, who am I to say I faced challenges, right? All it has created for me is compassion and awareness. I spent a part of a summer in Czechoslovakia during the Russian occupation in 1970. And what I gained from that, from being in a country filled with Russian tanks, is a belief in democracy. So we must fight for the full access to our democracy as well. Whether it's voting rights and helping people getting to the polls, right, on the most basic level, whatever one can do, and ensure that our young people are not discouraged. So I continue to believe wholeheartedly in democracy. And I must believe every single day that we will regain our equilibrium. Might say that I know.
Maybe it's hard to say because it's been.
Yeah, our balance. We need to.
Our
regain
balance.
Our sense of selves and our humanity as a country. They say that, the arm always swings toward justice. I have to believe that we are a country that believes in justice, and that we will achieve for everyone, every human being in this country, the opportunity and the pathway to opportunity that we all deserve.
Thank you so much for
You're
everything
welcome,
that
Deborah.
you shared
Thank
with us.
Thank you for having me.
Very inspiring and hopeful. Thank you.
Well,
I'll look forward to seeing you at the luncheon.
Oh, that sounds fabulous. And please let us know if you need more information. And thank you to your listeners for spending a little time with us.
And you inspired them greatly, I know. So thank you.